theme to make them more coherent. Then we'll go into our live Q&A segment. We'll reserve substantial time at the end to answer any questions we have not yet addressed. So do share any remaining questions that you have, again, using the Q&A function. You'll see that we don't have a chat function for this call. So I'll now hand over to Yasmin to get us started with an overview of CoImpact and the Gender Fund.
Thank you, Guhe. So some of you may be familiar with our foundational fund, as we've made 3 rounds of grants for the past 3 years. Our focus in Fund 1 was on systems change in the 3 sectors of health, education, and economic opportunity. This open call that we're talking about today is for the Gender Fund. Our vision in this fund is to advance gender equality for all people to live fulfilling lives. This Gender Fund builds on the learnings from our first fund and has an expanded scope to advance gender equality in 2 important ways. First, while we continue our core focus on systems change in health, education, and economic opportunity, it is with a clear objective to how these systems impact women and girls. And we have an added focus on women's leadership within these sectors. Second, we also look to support institutional change to advance women's leadership in law and economics. These 2 domains have an inordinate influence on public policy, national priorities, and resource allocation, and yet today, women are significantly underrepresented in the academic and professional institutions within these domains. You can literally count the number of central bank governors or judges in international courts on a few hands. Totally unacceptable situation. All of you are doing important and critical work and providing services to improve lives. We recognize it is important and we recognize it should be resourced. Our funding focus is on achieving equitable and inclusive impact at scale that endures over time. So everything we fund is about systems or institutional change. By this, we mean the formal and informal ways in which systems and institutions are organized, the policies and practices, how different actors in the systems and institutions experience and exercise power, how capacities, incentives, norms, and motivations drive behaviors of systems actors. So as a funder, we ultimately do care about changes in people's lives, what we call people-level outcomes or population-level impact, but we believe that the most powerful way of achieving these outcomes is through systemic and institutional change. We also recognize that this requires feminist approaches, dismantling the status quo, addressing structural barriers and exclusion, reorganizing the rules of the game, who has power, whose voice is heard, who is included, and who has influence. So this open call gives us an opportunity to partner with Global South and locally rooted organizations, especially those that are led by women, that bring feminist approaches to advancing gender equality. I will now share with you some considerations. Next slide, please. We are sharing these considerations with you to help you understand our principles, why we have prioritized these in our qualification and our selection process, and to help you determine if you're eligible for the Gender Fund. As we share these with you, we want to confirm that this information is also provided in our open call document. Please do read that carefully and really consider if it makes sense for your initiative and your organization. It will save you a lot of time and effort. We've also noticed a lot of questions we get are about these considerations. So hopefully this information is going to help answer most of your questions. And as my colleague Gu has said, please wait till the end of this presentation when you can include your questions in the Q&A section. Next slide, please. So our first consideration is Global South rootedness. Our experience with the Foundational Fund has shown us the importance of working with locally rooted organizations that are committed to the cause and the context. Global South organizations have deep roots in the countries where they work. They understand the local context and the governance, have the political savvy and trusted relationships, and long-term commitment to the cause. All of these are critical for systemic and institutional change. So for this round of funding, institutions and initiatives that are led by organizations rooted in the countries that the initiative is based on can apply. For the lead organizations to qualify, they must meet 2 out of the 3 criteria we have listed here. The global head office and majority of the total staff are in the global south country. What this means is that the lead organization's center of decision making, as well as majority of its team and operations, should be located in the country where the initiative is proposed. Second, the leader of the organization or the initiative and at least 50% of the senior leadership are from the global south country. Third, the lead organization or the initiative has long-term roots in the country, have been working on strengthening systems in the target country, can demonstrate long-term partnerships with local actors, and a commitment to investing in local talent for leadership positions. Please note that the initiative is only eligible if your organization meets 2 out of the 3 criteria at the time you apply. This for us is a minimum bar for eligibility. If you meet all 3 criteria, then your initiative receives a higher score. Now, we often get asked if Global North organizations can apply. While we certainly recognize that Global North organizations bring significant value to an initiative, they bring an opportunity for global learning and technical support, and we welcome concept notes that include Global North organizations as partners, we are clear that they may not be the lead for the initiative or the lead organization, as that does not meet the Global South criteria. Next slide, please. The second consideration is women-led. We believe that initiative and the organization's leadership matters. So our grant making will be enhanced when we have a stronger representation of women leaders in our portfolio. We also know that women-led organizations have been historically underfunded and undersupported. So we hope this open call is an opportunity for all those organizations to apply and partner with us. For the Gender Fund, we will make at least 75% of the country level grants to organizations that are substantively led by women. So what do we mean by substantive? First, the primary leader, as well as a significant portion of the senior leadership of the lead organization are women. And second, we see the governance structure, example, the board, having a significant or increasing representation of women. Now, this does not mean that we will not fund any male-led initiatives, but our intention here is to fund at least 75% women-led across all the country-level grants that we will make. Next slide, please. And our third consideration is geography. We have a set of countries that we have listed here that we identified based on basic threshold of governance and civic conditions. So we will only support initiatives that are based in these countries listed here. We often get asked, will we support countries that are not in this list? And unfortunately, those will not be eligible. Another question we get asked is if we support multi-country or multi-regional initiatives. Yes, your initiative may have a more regional scope and include some countries that are not on this list, but a bulk of the work has to be in the countries listed here. And when we say bulk, what we mean is at least 2/3 of the work proposed should be in the countries in this list. We hope all of these 3 considerations will help you determine if you're eligible for the Gender Fund. Please note we do not have any exceptions to these. So again, to save you time and effort, we hope you have been able to note these considerations. I will now hand over to my colleague Alfonsina to give us an overview of the grant types.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. Next slide, please. In our Gender Fund, we have developed 3 grant types to increase the opportunities for us to support different initiatives across a wider range of organizations. There are multiple ways of advancing gender equality. We know that some organizations, for example, focus on technical models or approaches to support government or market systems. Others aim to strengthen governance or the management of those systems. Some of you may be part of movements that seek to catalyze and sustain change. And many of you probably engage in advocacy for policy change or to tackle deep-seated norms. We recognize the importance of the diverse approaches, and hence not one grant type is more important than the other. They each have a purpose and the requirements that we will now share with you so that you can determine where your initiative may best fit to respond to our call. Next slide, please. The anchor grant type is meant to support initiatives that aim to transform the systems of health, education, and economic opportunity to advance gender equality. We selected these three sectors because these systems provide the most basic services to millions of people, services that are foundational to women's lives. So let's start with what we mean by a system. This can be a school system or a sexual and reproductive health system or the employment system. In many cases, your initiative may involve more than one system. For example, if you work in gender-based violence, your initiative may span health and education and economic systems. Now, we know that there are many ways in which you understand and work within the systems in these three sectors. What really matters for anchor grants is that the focus on changing or transforming these systems is tackling the root causes of their dysfunction so that they can work at scale. To distinguish, I'd like to share a few illustrative examples with you here. One is about what we would not support. We do not support organizations who provide community health services to improve access to quality health. Rather, we're interested in how these organizations can support and strengthen the national health programs for better community health. Some organizations, for example, advocate for the provision of childcare services for informal workers, a very important topic. However, at CoImpact, we want to support initiatives that seek for national livelihood programs to incorporate better governance and engagement of women and girls in the informal market, so that their work, voices, and experience is part of defining and implementing economic policies. Again, these are just examples. These are not priors of exactly how we see systems change, but hopefully this will give you an idea of how we understand it. Overall, for us, it is not about creating parallel structures to address the symptoms of system failure, such as lack of access or affordability, but more about the root causes. In other words, understanding challenges to the health and economic rights of women and girls so that they have the same opportunities to lead fulfilling lives. The initiatives supported by anchor grants will also aim to have impact at scale by including those who are often left behind by the systems. For us, systems working at scale means that they work for the last mile. In other words, that they reach and serve every person they are designed to, including those historically marginalized. Now, we realize that scale can be understood in many different ways. We are not looking for direct reach or for scaling up, but we are looking for your initiative to serve millions. We are not looking for your initiative to serve millions of women directly, but rather that the solutions to the systems you propose can indeed impact millions. We also encourage you to read our handbook that is available online and translated to different languages to understand the principles we refer to for systems change initiative. There are also several examples on our website of the initiatives we are supporting currently across health, education, and economic opportunity, which you can refer to. Finally, as systems change takes time and requires patience, the anchor grants provide substantial support, ranging from 5 to 20 million US dollars with relative flexible funding over a 5 to 6 year period. Next slide, please. Our domain grant is a new type of grant for CoImpact and is designed to support initiatives that focus on institutional change to advance women's leadership in the domains of law and economics. We are often asked, what is the difference between the domain grants and the anchor grants? An anchor grant in economic opportunity, for example, might seek to tackle the root causes of failures in the economic system for women. A domain grant might focus on how women enter, grow, and thrive or not in the academic and professional field of economics and law as well. An anchor grant focuses on economic systems. A domain grant focuses on the institutions that determine the rules of the game of how this field, law or economics, operates. the institutions that produce, support, and hire professionals, and the leaders who influence public and private policy, resource allocation, and national priorities. And the focus is on advancing women's leadership as professionals, in other words, economists or lawyers, in these fields and the institutions that shape them within these domains. Just like we talked about systems in the earlier grant type, we will explain how we think about institutions in two main ways. One are critical institutions. These we understand to be the main institutions that influence public policy, resource allocation, national priorities, and gender issues. For example, the Ministry of Public Policy, the Ministry of Justice, or Finance. The second category are what we call pipeline or supporting institutions. These institutions can be associations like professional associations or networks or convening agencies or academic institutions that create formal and informal pathways into the critical institutions we just described. Now, we are totally open to other ways in which you may think about the institutions and what makes sense in your context. What matters in the domain grants is that the focus is on institutional change and not limited to a few individuals. To distinguish, we will share a few illustrative examples with you here. For domain grants, we're not really interested in building skills and leadership capabilities among a few women or helping a select group of women to get opportunities in their leadership journey. What we're interested in is supporting collective and inclusive leadership, changing the rules of the game so that any woman has a fair chance of entering, growing, thriving, and exercising power in these professions. It is about looking at the policies and practices, both formal and informal, in these institutions, how women are hired, how recruitment biases are addressed, how women are promoted, and what networking and mentoring opportunities they get. We're particularly interested in an intersectional and feminist lens that focuses on women who have been historically marginalized in these fields. It is about the formal and informal rules of the game, about the gender supportive policies for women, and it is about changing mindsets and cultures so that the institutions become a place where women are encouraged to join, supported to thrive, and able to rise to leadership positions. We encourage you to refer to the hypothetical examples we included in our open call, and I'll provide a few more here. For example, we know that women face many obstacles that men do not. Sexual harassment at universities and work, the undue burden of childcare, which reduces time flexibility for writing, publishing, or traveling to conferences. Women also have much less opportunities for networking and mentoring. A potential domain grant could include work with an academic institution, an international organization, a network of professional associations, all working on concrete policies, resource allocation, and implementation plans to reduce these burdens for women already in the field. Another option could be something less traditional that targets some of the gender norms that determine what women study or even what area of expertise. Although women today enter the field of law more than men, which is not the case for economics, in both fields, they are dissuaded from focusing on more quote unquote male perceived areas of economics or law, such as macroeconomics or penal law. These also tend to be areas that are more visible, better paid, and more quote unquote respected by the field. So we do see efforts that focus on what type of policies women leaders might promote. Women might promote more gender sensitive tax policies or better policies to tackle gender-based violence. This is important and matters, but our focus is one step before, getting more and better representation of women leaders, regardless of the outcomes. In other words, we are not interested in the instrumentality of women leaders, but value it as an important end in itself. As we shared, for this grant type, our goal is to advance women's leadership as professionals in the field. Within this, we welcome your approaches to feminist leadership and collective leadership of women and girls. The grant details for the domain grants are between $2 to $4 million over 5 to 6 years. The next slide, please. Our Catalytic grant is also a new grant type for CoImpact and is designed to support organizations who have been historically under-resourced and under-supported and haven't had the chance or the resources to build out their strategies with a longer-term vision. This grant type will be 100% for women-led organizations, given the historical underfunding of these. Even in this grant type, our North Star is still systemic or institutional change. As shared previously, we are not looking for initiatives that plan linear scaling or provide direct service delivery. What we are looking for are initiatives that will work through the system or the institution to benefit a much larger group, but that need more time for that scale to manifest. One way to think about catalytic grants is as pre-anchor grants or pre-domain stage, as you can see on the spectrum on this slide. So the focus of these initiatives could be either the 3 sectors of health or education or economic opportunity, which would be pre-anchor, or either of the 2 domains of law and economics, which would be pre-domain. Catalytic grants are intended to support initiatives that have the potential for enduring impact at scale and need time and resources, a longer runway, if you will, to demonstrate feasibility and the viability of an approach, to test ways to truly solve the root causes of the problem, and invest in partnerships and form winning coalitions as needed by any systemic or institutional change approach. As seen in this table, we have listed what does and does not fall in this category. I will now hand over to my colleague Abe to talk us through some key things in the application process.
Thank you, Alfonsina. Before I share with you all more details about the requirements of each grant type, I do want to do a quick recap as we have shared quite a bit so far. Again, all of you do very important work in the world, but we want to note again that this particular open call window is for a specific and narrow type of work that some of you are doing. Many organizations do not do the type of systems or institutional change work that CoImpact is looking to support via this particular open call. So just to repeat, our emphasis for this open call is on systems change or institutional change. And again, our scope is the 3 grant types that Alfonsina just shared. Anchor grants for systems change in the 3 sectors of health, education, or economic opportunity. Domain grants to support institutional change efforts in order to advance women's leadership in critical and supporting institutions in the 2 domains of law and economics. And finally, catalytic grants, which are grants to support similar efforts to those of anchor or domain grants, but efforts that are at a slightly earlier stage in their development. Next slide, please. As you can see in this table, which is reproduced in much greater detail in our open call document on page 8, we have different requirements for our 3 different types of grants. Please review this table very carefully in the open call document, as the requirements vary by grant type. I will highlight just a few of the points in this table regarding evidence, track record, and organizational capacity. And please forgive us for the poor formatting of this particular slide. For evidence, when CoImpact talks about evidence, we're focused on what is the information, the evaluations, the assessment, the data, or the research that is giving you confidence that your particular model or idea will achieve the desired outcomes in your context. Our requirements for this vary by type of grant. For anchor grants, we require that you submit a summary of your best evidence, your best evaluation or assessment, showing that your core model or idea will indeed achieve the outcomes for people that you are aiming at. We do not require that your evidence be a third-party evaluation or use any specific methodology, but ask for a robust and relevant methodology. And of course, the more rigorous and relevant the evidence, the higher it will score in our evaluations. For domain and catalytic grants, a summary of your best evidence is recommended, but is not required. However, sharing evidence does make for a stronger case for your proposed initiative, and we will score more highly those initiatives that provide evidence, even in these grant types. Please carefully review our open call and our FAQ documents to better understand what we do and do not accept as evidence. Again, the more rigorous and relevant your evidence is to your context and proposed approach, the higher you will score. Secondly, let me discuss track record briefly. Here again, the requirements also vary by grant type. Details you'll find on this slide and also in the open call document. But one particular question that we receive very frequently is around catalytic grants, for which we require that applicants have been working on the effort for at least 2 years previously. As my colleague Alfonsino just shared, CoImpact thinks of catalytic grants as support for initiatives that are not in their initial exploration or proof of idea phase, but rather they are in a proof of scale phase. In other words, immediately prior to being ready for an anchor grant or a domain grant. Finally, with regards to our requirements for organizational capacity, again, these also vary by grant type. For anchor grants, we require that the lead organization has completed a financial audit in the most recent fiscal year for which it's available, and has a minimum budget size of at least $500,000 US in their most recent fiscal year. However, for domain and catalytic grants, there is no minimum budget required for the lead organization. Again, this table and all of these details are included in our open call document. We've received many questions on these, so please do carefully review this table as you determine which grant type you are applying for. We hope that this also signals to you that CoImpact is looking to partner with a range of different types of organizations across our different grant categories. Next slide, please. I will now speak to what is required to complete your application via our online application portal. We launched our open call on September 30th of this year and have already seen a number of applications that have been started and completed in the portal. We ask that you please complete your application as per the requirements in the document, and which I will review briefly with you here. Incomplete applications and ineligible applications will not be reviewed. We want to be mindful of your time and effort, so we're trying to make these as clear as possible for you. Next slide, please. Part 1 of the application process is to complete the intake form, again, available via our online portal. This intake form has a list of questions right up front to help us to get to know your organization and your initiative better. Please be sure to complete these questions honestly, as we will verify this information. This section will also require you to clarify which grant type you are applying for out of our 3. As my colleague shared in the previous section, each of the 3 grant types offered through this open call are a unique window of opportunity to support your initiative. Our application portal allows you to select your primary and secondary grant type choice. Please consider carefully how your initiative's focus aligns with the purpose and requirements of each grant type. The primary grant is what we will reference to score your initiative. During our review process, we may recategorize your grant type to the secondary preference, and this will only apply to those applicants invited for the next stage of the process, i.e. those that are invited to send us a detailed proposal. Next slide, please. The second part of the application is the concept note. We have provided a template for you to complete and build a simple concept note to submit to us as part of your application. Each section of the template includes guidance to help you describe various aspects of your initiative, including the problem and your approach to systems or institutional change, your proposed impact over a 5-year period, and your track record, including your results up to the present time, the partnerships you have in place, and your team. We have designed to keep the lift for this concept note as light as possible on your end, and are requesting, therefore, a concept note that is at maximum 4 pages. Within the template, we have also provided guidance indicating page limits for each of the various sections. Please try to stay well under these limits. They are there because we are trying to minimize the required effort for you while still ensuring we can get the information we need to fully assess your initiative at this preliminary stage. The template and the page limits are a requirement. We are unfortunately unable to review applications in a different template or submitted without a concept note. To be fair across all applicants and to balance effort on your part and our ability to review, we will only review applications that use the concept note template. You can locate the template in PDF format to download on both our website and our online application portal. At the bottom of this slide, we have included a link to the English version, and our website has the template in all 6 languages that we are able to accept. You can submit the concept note in either Word or PDF format, and our preference is for you to submit the concept note in English, but we will also accept it in the 5 additional languages noted on our website, including Bahasa, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Tagalog. This is in alignment with CoImpact's commitment to language justice. Next slide, please. The third part of your application is the evidence summary. We have also provided a simple template for you to use for this to complete a 1-page summary of your evidence. Again, as a reminder, this is required for all applicants for anchor grants, while it is recommended but not required for applicants for domain and catalytic grants. But again, even for those applicants, we will score higher those applications that are able to submit evidence. Also, the template is slightly different for anchor grants compared to the others, so please take note of that. At this stage, you will not need to include any detailed documentation or links for your evidence. For those who progress further into the process, we will follow up to request such documentation later. Next slide, please. So to summarize, let me bring it all together here again to repeat. There are 4 key aspects for your application. We've discussed the intake form, the concept note, and the evidence summary already. There's one additional piece, which is optional, which is this 1-page visual. For this 1-page visual, again, as an optional component, if you feel that it would be helpful to better describe your initiative or illustrate an idea, you have the option to include a 1-page visual of some form. This might be, for example, a diagram of your theory of change, a map of your system, or something of that sort. The deadline to submit your application is December 20th, 2021. Note that we will not have any extensions to this deadline, and we encourage you to submit sooner, as our application portal is already open. If you're encountering any technical difficulties, you may also email us at the email address included here. We will also be sharing this slide deck and webinar recording for your reference. I will now hand back to my colleague Guhe to help manage our question and answer session.
Thank you, Abe. So that was a lot of information. We do hope it was clear and useful. So we're going to take a break at this point. Please ask your questions using the Q&A button. Feel free to ask the question in whichever language you're comfortable in. After about 4 or 5 minutes, we will continue by responding to your pre-submitted questions. Thank you. So we'll resume in about 3 to 4 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We'll continue to take those. As I said at the beginning, we won't be able to get to all of these questions. There are quite a few of you on this call with lots of inquiries. So if we don't get to your question, please do check back on our FAQ document that is online on the open call page. So we'll start off with my colleague Abe, who will be answering questions under some of the pre-submitted questions, excuse me, and he'll be talking about the application process. Over to you, Abe.
Thank you, Guhe. So we received a few questions about collaborations and coalitions applying, such as can two organizations collaborate on a grant application? And if so, what are the requirements? The answer to this is that CoImpact very much welcomes coalitions and partnerships to apply together. However, if you do so, you must designate a lead organization for the partnership. And the requirements and considerations that Yasmin and I and Alfonsina described in this presentation and are detailed in our open call documents, they apply to the lead organization that is designated for the application. We will also consider the depth and duration of your partnership history among the various partners in our scoring process. Another question was around the number of concept notes that a single organization can submit or be a part of. There is no limit to the number of concept notes that an organization can submit, the number of applications that an organization can be a part of either. However, we want to note a few important considerations for you to think about if you're considering multiple applications. CoImpact is looking to fund initiatives that the organization and its partners are deeply committed to. That is, the initiatives are a particular singular core focus of the organization, a really important priority, not just one among many projects in the organization's portfolio. Furthermore, in our experience, systems and institutional change is intensive and requires an organization-wide commitment at all levels within the organization, particularly at the leadership level. Please do carefully consider these factors and focus on the initiative or the initiatives that you are most committed to. Another question we've received is it possible for a trade union to apply for this call for proposals? The answer to this is that yes, CoImpact accepts applications from all types of organizations, but our requirements for track record, financial capacity, and otherwise for each grant type do apply. Finally, we received a question whether newly registered organizations are eligible to apply. The answer to this is that we are looking to fund initiatives that are already underway at various stages, depending on the type of grant you are applying for, and to help these initiatives scale their impact. So if your organization has been doing this work for at least the number of years required under our track record requirements, but only recently registered, then yes, you may apply, but just please make sure to note that when you respond to the requirements around track record. I'm now going to hand to Yasmin for some additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe. And thank you, everyone, so much for your active participation and the many questions. Again, we hope to answer as many as we can today, but we do encourage you to look at the open call document. Everything we shared is in that, as well as an FAQ document on our website that we will also be mailing to you after this webinar. So I'll take a few questions under the budget, starting with, could you provide details of unallowed costs? Are office costs included as part of indirect? Are indirect costs associated with the Global North office allowable? So first, we do not set a fixed limit on direct or overhead costs, except for universities where there is a cap of 15%, but not for any other organization type. What we focus on is the overall budget for the initiative, and we rely on the applicants to lay out the case for different aspects of the budget, including overheads and organizational strengthening needs. Next question, what % of the requested funds should be the annual income of the organization, if this is applicable at all. So our response is, we again do not have any prescribed percentage in relation to the annual income of the organization. Our focus really is to understand what is the overall budget needed for the initiative and what portion of that budget will CoImpact funding be. So what is the proportion of CoImpact funding towards the overall budget? What we are trying to understand in the track record and capacity section is the financial capacity of the organization. And as you've noticed in the section my colleague Abe covered, our requirements for minimum annual budget, financial audits are for the anchor grant type only. Next question. Can matching funds be in-kind contributions, things like staff time and assets, or is it only cash? So the response here is, first, we're not looking for matching funds, right? Again, our approach is, what is the initiative need for the overall budget and what proportion of that budget is the CoImpact funding for? And we realize that there are other different sources of funding, philanthropic, in-country, public-private sources that would also fund the initiative. So you can count any of those resources, including in-kind, that can be used towards the initiative's budget. For CoImpact, we generally fund, and this is an important thing, a significant portion of the initiative budget, but not all of it. So for instance, the anchor grants, we would typically expect to fund 25 to 50% of the total initiative budget. And so the initiative does need to raise funds from other sources, but not all of that funding has to be in place in year one. It is something that can happen over the life of the initiative. Next question, can the total cost of the initiative be less than the minimum range indicated? Yes, absolutely. It should be again based on what is the overall need for the initiative's budget and then what proportion is the CoImpact contribution. I'll now move to a different type of question, which is legal requirements. A very specific question where an organization based in India, 2.5-year-old organization, currently we do not have the FCRA license. Would we be eligible to receive funding for the India entity? So we understand that you may not have the FCRA documentation ready at the time you apply, but please ensure that you're well on your way to getting it, because this is something that we will need to have in place before we can make the grant. So we don't require it at the time of application, we do require it at the time of making the grant. Switching to an evidence question. So the concept note template that we have shared that my colleague Abe talked about in detail, this question is, question 4 in the concept note template contains expected outcomes of catalytic grants, new evidence, proof of viability, coalition building. Is that what it entails, or is it outcomes for the planned initiative? So first, I just really want to thank you for referencing the concept note template. And I want to take this opportunity to reiterate that we will only receive review applications that have used the concept note template we have provided. You can access it in the open call document. It's also on our website. And as Abe said, we receive applications in 6 languages. Coming to this question about section 4, what we're looking for is the impact over the 5-year period of the initiative. So please articulate your impact, and you can reference the list of outcomes document we have included in the open call, and that's available on our website. And again, just taking a minute here, what we have done with the open call document and on our website is made available all kinds of resources. We've made available the open call. We've got hypothetical examples in there. We have the list of outcomes as a reference. We have the templates, both for the concept note and the evidence, everything possible in all 6 languages. So really spend time on that so that the time and effort you put into your application is actually going to be worth it and you're not wasting your time. I'll hand over to Alfonsina for the next set of questions.
Thank you, Yasmin. I will tackle some of the questions that came through about grant types, and I'll start with qualifications. One of the questions we received was, our project fits with the Catalytic grant in terms of maturity, but the project itself already addresses a specific domain. Is this an issue? The answer is no. a catalytic grant can be focused on women's leadership in a specific domain, whether it's law or economics, and they can be pre-anchor or pre-domain stage. In this case, it seems that this would be a pre-domain stage grant, catalytic grant. Another question we got here was, would the systemic exploration and bringing together of two proven gender equity models by partners qualify for a catalytic grant? As we shared in our presentation, we recommend sharing evidence for your catalytic grant applications, as well as welcome any proven equity models that you have as evidence. We want to clarify that these grants are intended to further the respective outcomes that we shared with you, so please do articulate those. We are also looking for initiatives with a minimum 2-year track record for catalytic grants. Another question we received was, are health, education, or economic opportunity outcomes, do these need to be demonstrated for catalytic grant, or are intermediate ones such as new norms that govern behaviors and outcomes sufficient? The answer here is we recognize that initiatives applying for the catalytic grant are in an earlier stage of the work, and the duration of the grant, which is 3 to 4 years, may not be enough to achieve the people level outcomes in health, education, and economic opportunity. We are open to initiatives that make a compelling case for intermediate outcomes to the people level outcomes and show the pathways to achieving those over time. We're also keen to learn how these initiatives will work through the system to achieve these outcomes and what shifts in the system in irreversible ways. I'll hand over now to my colleague Yasmin for some final pre-received questions, and then we'll go to try to answer as many as possible of the questions that we received during the webinar.
Thank you, Alfonsina. So the first question is sub-granting by larger women's rights organizations to smaller women's rights organizations for capacity building, institutional strengthening acceptable in this call? Yes, we do support lead organizations to sub-grant to other organizations in the ecosystem, and we more than support institution building and organizational strengthening as we realize how critical it is. Next question, in what capacities are global northern organizations eligible to be part of the Gender Fund? As a technical partner, linked question, is there a requirement to operate in the Global South, solely in the Global South, or are North-South projects acceptable? So as we shared, Global North organizations may be included in the concept note as a partner for the initiative, but may not be the lead organization that is submitting the application. And when we look at these partnerships, we do examine them closely to determine genuine leadership from the Global South lead organization. As we noted, North-South partnerships are okay. However, North-South projects may not be, because the scope of work has to be in the 13 countries in our consideration set. Next question. Any logistical possibility for transferring the fund from Global North organization if we are applying for a regional proposal, or are only country applications allowed? So it's a two-part question. First, to clarify, we will consider regional initiatives that are more than one country. Again, please think about which countries those are, and if they're from the list of 13, if they include countries not in that list, then we will look at if the bulk of the work, that's at least 2/3 of it, is in the countries in the list. For the question about the Global North organization's role, again, as we shared, we've got the criteria for Global South, and Global North organizations may be partners. Next question, is it possible to apply for the proposal regionally, an anchor organization in Indonesia in partnership with other NGOs in Sri Lanka or India? Yes, it is possible. All of these countries are in the list that we shared, and so it is possible, and we accept regional initiatives. But as you apply, please do think that what we're looking for is initiatives that show a deep understanding of the problem and the context. Systems change, institutional change takes a real understanding of the political economy, the power analysis, long-term relationships with local actors, bringing together a winning coalition, and all of this deep work at the country level. So again, our preference is to organizations that are based in the country where the initiative is proposed. I will now hand back to Guhe to take us to the live Q&A section.
Thank you, Yasmin. Next slide, please. So we're going into live Q&A. I think we've received about 135 questions, so we're definitely not going to get to all of them. But we're going to follow a similar pattern where different members of the team are going to take different categories. A reminder that if we don't get to your question in this session, we are taking notes of all the questions that are being asked, and we will be periodically updating our FAQ document, which you can find online. So please check back there, as well as checking all the documents that colleagues have been referencing throughout their presentations, which can be found on the Open Call website. So to kick us off, we're going to start with Abe again.
Thank you, Guhe. So I will answer some additional questions that we received from the live Q&A process around the application. So first, a number of questions, additional questions came in around collaboration, partnerships, and coalitions for an application. So a number of them were similar. For example, can the alliance or coalition of organizations applying have a country office of UNDP or any other UN organization as one of the partners? Another question asked, can the UN Office of India be one of the partners in the coalition led by an Indian NGO? A third question asked, can international organizations, INGOs, be part of a consortium to apply to the anchor or domain grant? The answer to all of these questions is yes. You may partner with multilateral or international organizations or the government as long as the lead organization is Global South against the criteria that Yasmin first described and is detailed specifically in our open call documents. A second question is there any limit on the total number of organizations in a consortium applying together? The answer to this is that no, there is not any limit per se on the total number of organizations in a consortium. However, please note that when reviewing the application, we will look carefully at the track record and history of the partnerships among the organizations involved, and we will consider this in our scoring. Third, we received a question whether government partners are allowed, and the answer to this is yes. Partnerships with government entities are allowed as part of an initiative and certainly can be quite helpful depending on the scope and focus of the work. Finally, a final question around collaboration is whether just the lead organization should fill out the application template, or should all partners fill out the application template? The answer to this is that the lead organization is the one who should mainly fill out the application template. It is that lead organization in the partnership for whom our various requirements apply and will be considered. Secondly, we have a number of questions additional about the application language and timing. Questions around whether projects should be submitted in English and what other languages are welcome. As I stated previously, we are able to accept concept notes in English as well as 5 other languages, which include Bahasa, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and Tagalog. Our preference is to receive the concept notes in English, but we are able to receive them in any of those other 5 languages specified. Additionally, our applications reviewed on a rolling basis or after the December 20th deadline. The answer to this is both. Applications will be reviewed on a rolling basis, but there will be additional review that happens after the December 20th deadline, at which point the application portal will close. We highly encourage you to apply when you are ready. You don't need to be rushed, but we encourage you to apply before the December 20th deadline if possible. Additionally, a question around for-profit social enterprises and whether they are eligible to apply. The answer is yes, they are eligible to apply, but the requirements for any other organization are consistent for these, and we will take special care to ensure that the work of the application is on systems change or institutional change, the same as for every other grant, and this is the focus of the organization. Finally, a question about women-led. For anchor grants and catalytic grants, does women-led refer to the person heading up the proposed program, or must the organization head also be a woman? For CoImpact, what we mean when we consider women-led is that the organization's head, the CEO or the executive director, and or the initiative lead should be a woman, ideally both. We will also look to see if a significant portion of the senior leadership of the anchor organization or initiative are women, and we will look at the gender composition of the lead organization's governance structure, such as their board of directors. Finally, a last question we received was whether organizations that have previously been selected for other grants from CoImpact or applied are still eligible to apply for the Gender Fund. The answer to this is yes. There are no restrictions for having submitted a prior application or received prior funding, but we would highly encourage you to carefully review all of the requirements for this particular open call, as they are different from prior open calls. Thank you, and now I'll hand to Yasmin for some additional live questions.
Thank you, Abe. So I'll take a few set of questions, starting with how many grants do you intend to give per country? So we have not set targets for the number of grants by country. Our overall range for this open call is to fund anywhere between 15 to 25 grants across the 3 grant types. And what we will look for is a balance across geographies and countries. Next question. How do you define linear scaling of a direct implementation model? Please, can you give an example of this? So as my colleague Alfonsina shared in her section, expanding direct reach of an organization is what we consider linear scaling. For instance, if you're currently providing services to a few 100,000 women and plan to increase that to 1 million women by expanding your organization's interventions, and without actually changing anything in the system, we'd consider that linear scaling. For the focus on systems or institutional, what we would look for is what are the key levers in the system that will change? Is it policies or practices? Is it capacities or roles? Is it incentives or motivations of the systems actors, or formal, informal rules or norms? What needs to change in that system for that change to be adopted by the system to bring about improved and inclusive services for millions of people? And that's the opposite of linear scaling, that is adoption at scale. We also encourage you to look at our handbook that's online, where we go into this in much further detail. Next question. What % from the pre-selected projects, the one that make it to the second round, do you expect to fund? So our expectation is to fund at least 1 in 5. That's about 20% that will move from the second round to final selection. But again, please note that this is based on an estimation of the number of applications that we'll receive and is likely to vary by region and by grant type. Next question. I understand that there are co-funding requirements for anchor and domain grants, but not for catalytic grants. So how should the co-funding be done? Sorry, we have a live document here, and for a minute, I lost my place in the document. So how should the co-funding be done, in kind or cash? So again, please note that overall, let's start with what's the overall initiative's budget, what portion of that will be CoImpact funding, For anchor grants, we expect that to be 25 or 50% of the overall initiative. And for domain or catalytic grants, we don't have those specific requirements, but our preference is to not be the only funder supporting the initiative. And also we understand that this funding may not be in place at the start of the initiative, and we actually expect it over the life of the initiative. I'll take a few questions related to evidence now. For anchor grant, if you don't mean direct reach of 1 million and include reach of millions through the initiative, how do you suggest measuring this? An impact may not directly happen through our activities and may also not happen during the grant period. A linked question, can you talk about the type of evidence you're expecting to see the success of a project? So we are actually very open to the methodology. From our side, we do not require a specific methodology to determine impact. What we want to hear is from you what evaluation methodology makes sense for your context and your initiative. What we will look for is it rigorous? Is it robust? Does it match the initiative approach that has been proposed? Is it based in that context? So that's what the qualifying factors we will look at. We also are not looking at direct attribution for the impact on 1 million lives. What we're looking for is a compelling case of the contribution that your initiative makes to the proposed impact. And we understand some change happens over a 5-year period and a longer arc. So we suggest including both in the concept note. What change and impact do you expect to see in the 5-year period? And what is the longer arc of change that you hope to see? I will now hand to my colleague Alfonsina for the next set of questions.
Thank you, Yasmin. I'll tackle a few questions that we've received on grant types. One question says, are design grants as one component of anchor or catalytic grants accepted in this funding cycle? The answer, which you can also find in our FAQ document, is that through this round, we are inviting applications for only 3 types of grants: anchor, domain, and catalytic. We are not asking for design applications. The anchor and domain grant types will have an initial design grant phase. CoImpact will award these design grants to organizations that best meet our criteria and requirements for these type of grants. And this phase is built into the catalytic grant, but it is intended as a longer runway for organizations to develop their initiative strategies and plans. You can find more information about the design phase in our FAQ, but it is meant to help organizations advance, fully flesh out, and pressure test their initiatives while preparing a detailed prospectus for a multi-year grant. So in a way to think about design grants is to think about it as the year 0 preceding your anchor domain grant. It's important to note that not all design grant awardees will receive the subsequent multi-year anchor or domain grant. An additional question that we had received was, in terms of strengthening women's political participation and leadership, do you focus more on bringing women into political spaces or enhancing the capacity and leadership of women who are already active in the spaces and systems? Here I want to emphasize that the focus of our domain grants is on women's leadership as professionals in law and economics. The focus is not on political participation or political leadership, although we understand and acknowledge that many professionals in these fields do indeed have political positions and leadership. However, the domain grants are interested in both supporting getting more women into the fields of law and economics, in other words, entry, not necessarily political, but it can be, as long as you're arguing that it's in law and economics, as well as how to better support those already in the fields, but they have to be in law and economics, regardless of whether they are in a political position or not. Another question around the domain grants is, does the organization need to have a critical institutional partner? Do interventions have to directly work with the institutions, or can they work with women leaders who can then bring positive changes to the institutions and systems? The answer, similarly to the one that my colleague Abe provided for the anchor grants, is that it is not a requirement, but it certainly helps to get higher scores if you're able to create or already have partnerships that increase the chances of that institutional change. However, working with champions and women leaders within these institutions and systems is absolutely fine. Another question we received is, would initiatives that have been underway for 10 to 12 years still be considered under catalytic grants? The answer here is that depends. As we described, the catalytic grants could be seen as pre-anchor or pre-domain. And if you, regardless of how long your initiative has existed for, are unable to meet some of the requirements of an anchor or a domain grant, that is demonstrating feasibility, that you have been able to test ways to solve the root causes, or you've been able to invest in partnerships or winning coalitions, if you have been unable to do so for the past however many years, especially due to lack of funding, then yes, you could be eligible. As we presented, the objective of this grant is to provide the runway and the resources for organizations to build the organizational and strategic resources so that they eventually can be eligible for a systems or a domain grant, but haven't really had the chance. Another question we've received is it possible to have any of the other two grant types after selecting the catalytic grant as a primary grant? The answer here is that we encourage you to review the requirements very carefully to determine the fit of your organization and your initiative. The requirements and the objectives of each grant type are quite specific to the grant type and to the objectives of that grant. It is probably unlikely that you could select an anchor grant as a subcategory if you've already selected catalytic, but it might be possible. We're open to it. We just encourage you to review very carefully the requirements and really be honest with yourselves about where your organization and your initiative fit best. Another question was, under the anchor grants, can agricultural systems be considered as a subsystem under economic systems? The straightforward answer is yes. One more question we received: our initiative works doing regranting to women-led organizations. Is there any restriction in the anchor grant for this practice? The answer is no. The only restriction is if you will do regranting in India, the FCRA requirement does apply. And of course, you would have to justify that those women-led organizations that you're regranting to would be doing work that falls under the anchor grant requirements. Another question, are international organizations eligible for the anchor grants? I believe my colleague Abe has already answered this question. Not as a lead, but they can apply as partners or part of a consortium. Can an initiative cover only one country, or does it have to involve more than one country? The short answer is yes, an initiative can cover only one country as long as it is one of the list that is in the open call. I'll now hand it over to one of my colleagues to keep on answering some of the live questions we've received.
Thank you, Alfonsina. We can take a few more. And again, as my colleague Gu has said, apologies, we won't get to all of your questions, but we will try and also update our FAQ document for the questions that are coming. So a question here is, my question relates to the interpretation of the scoring criteria for trans and gender diverse-led organizations. What is the relationship and history of CoImpact in understanding and resourcing transgender women and gender diverse-led organizations? Such an important question. And we say this in our open call, wherever we say women and girls, we mean that in the most inclusive way for how women and girls understand themselves on the gender spectrum. So absolutely, and this is also such an important point from an intersectional perspective. There is issues not only of gender, but also identity and other forms of oppression. So we do encourage, and these initiatives will actually receive a higher score from that intersectional perspective and understanding of the problem. Next question, does the evidence requirement for anchor grant have to come from the same geography where the project implementation is proposed? For instance, if you're working in India, can we give examples from Bangladesh or similar contexts? Yes, we are looking to understand what gives you confidence that the outcome and the impact you have proposed will be understood. Now, the closer you are to the context, the more confidence that gives you and us. So our preference is to have evidence from that context, from your work. But we understand that if it is a reference from other contexts, then what we will look for is that compelling case on why it is relevant, because contextual knowledge matters so much. Next question. Let's say we are working in the health system and our analysis shows that a key root cause of the problem we are addressing is outside of the health system altogether. Is it okay for the project to focus on the root cause that affects the system, but isn't necessarily part of it? Yes, and in some ways, if the root cause affects the system and its outcomes, then it is a part of it. So again, we will look to understand what that problem analysis is, what the root cause analysis is, and importantly, how addressing that root cause will then lead to an improved, inclusive, effective health system that has better health outcomes at the population level. So we will look for the logic between the root cause all the way to the outcomes, and we rely on the applicants to make that case in the concept note. Next question. The lead organization should be over 5 years in the initiative. Is this in reference to the intervention or the outcome? So from our side, this is in reference to the intervention or the activities for the initiative. We're looking for a track record for how long the lead organization has been working on the issue, including problem analysis, strategy, partnership development, testing and scaling of the approaches. Next question. You mentioned transformation in health, education, and economic opportunity. How about women and girls' leadership in governance and political participation? So at one level, our focus is on advancing women's leadership in the 3 sectors and in the academic and professional institutions in the 2 domains that we shared with you. If the work proposed for women and girls' leadership in governance is within these sectors or domains, then we seek to understand that focus in the application. For instance, we have an initiative in India that aims to improve economic livelihoods for people who depend on the commons. And that initiative includes increasing number of women leaders in local governance structures at the village level in India. And we see that, and so it's perfectly part of the initiative. I'll switch to a few budget questions. We are in Mexico. We do not have audited accounts, but we are certified annually by an external firm. Is that enough? So this question first should be asked by grant type, right? For our domain or the catalytic grants, we actually do not require audited financials. We recommend them, but it's not a requirement, and it is a requirement for the anchor grants. But if you have a compelling reason for not having audited financials, please do share that in the application form, and we have created a place in the application form where this kind of information can be included. Next set of questions. We are an SMME, applying for a Catalytic grant. We bank with major banks such as Barclays, and we are currently on the Stanford Seed program. Audited accounts are not required in the SMME sector. Can we still apply for the grant as we are interested in the Catalytic grants? So absolutely, as my colleague Abe shared, the table that is on page 8 in our open call document, we are very clear that for Catalytic grants, we do not require audited financials. So please do continue looking at those qualifying requirements by grant type for your initiatives. Next question. Do organizations have a minimum income to access these grants? So for anchor grants, the lead organization's budget should be 500,000 or higher for the previous financial period. For the domain or Catalytic grants, we do not have a minimum budget requirement. Another question related to budget. I doubt whether there is a format for presenting a budget, and if there is not, how would you like the budget to be presented in the proposal? So you're right, we have not included a budget format because what we want to understand from you is what is the overall budget for the initiative, what according to you are major aspects of that budget, and what is the co-impact proportion within that overall budget. There's a few questions on Global South rootedness, and a lot of these are to do with whether Global North or international organizations can apply. And as we've shared with you, we have very strict criteria for Global South. We have those 2 out of 3 criteria in our open call document, so please do refer to those. I'll now hand back to Guhit.
Thank you, Yasmin. So as you can see, this has been quite a robust session. We hope it's been helpful to you. Thank you for submitting all these really great questions and for bearing with us as we try to answer them as completely and as efficiently as possible. It's been helpful for us to hear what was clear and what wasn't. We're learning so much, and it will enable us to be better at sharing our process going forward. We will be emailing a link to a recording of this webinar as well as the slides after this call. So you may review it or share it with others, and we'll put it on our website as well. We did receive a question about whether it will be available in Spanish and Portuguese, and unfortunately it will not. The recording will only be in English. We'll also be sending a short survey asking for your feedback. Please help us understand how we can improve. Finally, as you can see from all the information that we have shared, this grant opportunity is not for everyone. There may be terrific organizations doing powerful work that do not fit the criteria we have laid out, but some definitely do. If you feel that a CoImpact Gender Fund grant is right for your initiative, we would love to hear from you. Please apply. Please do so via our online application in good time before the December 20th deadline. Specifically, the deadline is at midnight PST, which is 7 a.m. GMT on December 21st. Thank you for your interest and for joining us and for giving us your time. We are grateful to you and for the important work that you are doing. We look forward to learning more and being in touch soon. Thank you for your time.